economic crisis in the history of capitalism, starting with the Wall Street crash of 1929, leading to mass unemployment, the Great Depression. And actually, the Soviets were the only ones that had really foreseen this, and they talked about it as early as 1927 and the 15th Congress of the CPSU. But that very quickly changed the overall mood, the overall dynamic. It overturned the sense of stability because, being Marxists, the Bolsheviks knew very well that capitalist crisis tends to be accompanied by certain social phenomena. One of those being the rise of the left, as working class people who always bear the brunt of the crisis realize that their survival is predicated on collective organization, on collective struggle. But in response to the rise of the left, then the capitalist class is perfectly capable of resorting to violence and coercion in order to protect itself, in order to protect the basic structure of the capitalist system. And as we know only too well, that coercion numerous times in the 20th century took the form of fascist paramilitary force. So this period of relative stability was transformed quite suddenly into a powder keg, into a very precarious, very fragile situation. And of course, that hangs off capitalist crisis is war, being the ultimate means to kickstart an economy, what Mandel later referred to as military Keynesianism, and a scramble for land, a scramble for resources, for markets, for cheap labor. And the danger of a new world war in Europe was increasingly well understood by this point. And of course, the basic conditions had been set for it by the Treaty of Versailles following World War I. So this is the big shift that's happening externally to the Soviet Union. In foreign policy terms, it led to a major turn to the left, with the Comintern adopting class against class, advocating a complete break with social democracy and so on. In domestic policy, there was also a turn to the left in terms of rapid industrialization, rapid collectivization. And I think we're going to talk about the foreign policy and the Comintern line a bit later. And I think ultimately it turned out to be incorrect and to not accurately reflect the actual balance of forces in the West. But the domestic changes, I think, were indispensable. The gradualism of the NEP era had ceased to be viable. The Soviets knew perfectly well that they would be targeted in any world war. In a scramble for land, in a scramble for resources, there's no way the imperialist powers would leave this enormous landmass of Russia, Central Asia, the Caucasus alone. And as you've quoted, Stalin said, we catch up with the advanced capitalist countries within 10 years or we'll be crushed. He made that remark in 1931. 10 years later, the Nazis launched their onslaught on Russia. So whatever one thinks of Stalin, you sort of have to accept that this comment was pretty spot on, a very accurate appraisal of the overall global situation and the Soviet Union's place within it. So that, I think, is the global context for the very frenetic socialist construction of the 1930s.
One thing that many observers, certainly from the left, who unfortunately, they're simply partisans for one camp or another within, those who were the leadership of the Soviet Union. And there was a great political struggle inside the Soviet Union